welcome everybody. You may have noticed that we are not Eric. We are going to be filling in this evening for Eric. It's me, your host, Kara, and we have our super fantastic returning co-host, Helen Green, with us this evening. So welcome everybody. We're glad to be here. And don't worry, Eric is not gone for good. We're just filling in this time for him. So he will be back. We did not kidnap him and put him in a trunk or anything like that. You'll see him again.
Or did we?
Or did we? You'll have to come back for another episode later and find out.
Cliffhanger, everybody, cliffhanger.
Yes, we'll see. Absolutely. Well, while we're getting started here, we do in fact want to hear from you all as well. So we're going to try and fill in for Eric and do all of the same things as we normally do, but bear with us if we don't get it exactly right. But I am going to go ahead and start our first poll so we can hear from all of you all. All right, so the poll should be up. We just have one poll question today, and that is, given that the US Supreme Court has now transformed constitutional law to the point that puts religious exemption rights above all other rights, what do you think is the best solution? And the answer choices are: increase the number of Supreme Court justices, impose term limits, file such an extreme case that it makes the Supreme Court's current rulings fall apart, or some other idea. So we'll be excited to hear your ideas on that. And if you do answer some other idea, feel free to drop that in the chat so we can hear specifically what your thoughts are on that. And we'll come back to that in a little bit. But first, let's actually talk about RfRx. We've mentioned that a few times. What is it? Well, it's the reason we're here. It's the best night of the week, in my opinion. It is a weekly series of online show where we have guests come on to talk about topics that may be relevant to folks in RfR. And we are having a returning guest this evening, and I am super excited because I know she is going to be talking about some things that are super relevant. So we're excited to have her back. And just as a reminder, again, this is not meant to be a replacement for our online community or our support groups, but it is sort of a complement to those communities where we have a little bit of continuity. We do this every Monday evening, or depending on where you live, it's Monday evening here in Texas, where I live. And we provide just, we have speakers come on and give some good advice and coping skills and talk about topical and timely issues that might be interesting to those of us who are here. And as always, if you have any topical questions or comments or ideas that you'd like to see come up on future shows, you can always shoot those over to us in an email at rfrx@recoveringfromreligion.org. And as always, all of our previous RfRx recordings can be found on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/recoveringfromreligion. And we're dropping those in the chat now, so you can feel free to check those out. Now, having said that, Helen, we have talked about RfR a few times. Can you tell us what is RfR?
Oh, yes, I can. So Recovering from Religion, our mission statement is RfR is to offer hope, healing, and support to those struggling with issues of doubt and non-belief. How do we do that? We do that by offering hope, healing, and support to people who reach out to us. So let me talk a little bit about the healing part. So that comes in the form of our helpline that you can either call or chat in. It's 24/7 worldwide. You can log onto our website, either call in or chat in, and a trained, supportive, empathetic ear agent will listen to you, help you guide you through whatever you're dealing with, whether it's dealing with religious family members, if it's dealing with the fear of hell, if whatever it coming out, as you're deconverting, whatever it is, they will offer you any support that you need. We also have resources available on our website. If you go there, you'll find a bunch of different articles and books and videos and all these different things to whatever topic you're looking for regarding religion, doubt, and unbelief. You can go there and find a bunch of different resources for yourself there. The next part would be our hope part. So this comes in the form of listening and sharing and hearing other people's stories. because basically we all agree we're all in this together on this journey, you know, whether you're deconverting, if you're starting to question, if you're moving from one religion to another, wherever you are in your path, we all are on this journey and we all need support and care. So I'm going to direct you to our blog. Kara's going to put the link right into the description and to the chat, and that will lead you to our blog where you can read excommunication stories of people that have gone through this process and what they learned and what they discovered along the way. Also, you can also check out our old podcast, which our hosts had a bunch of different guests on talking about the deconversion process, issues with religion, all these different topics and things that we all need to talk about, and kind of further expanded on their experience as well. Do you want to talk about support, Kara? I know you do.
Absolutely. So I'm so privileged that I get to talk about the part that Eric always talks about, because it's his very most favorite. And he's, of course, our support group director. But yes, we also have peer support groups, and these are face-to-face in-person meetings. So maybe if you want something that's a little bit more consistent, more in-person and personal than the online communities or the helpline, we have these recurring in-person meetings. Now, of course, because of the pandemic, most of these have gone online. So these are occurring virtually, but we do expect that they will be returning to in-person in the future. And we are also going to continue to have online opportunities as well. We have currently 65 peer support groups around the world, and that number is constantly growing. We just had, several more pop up. I think it was in Eastern Europe. So wherever you are in the world, you never know, take a look. There might actually be a peer support group near you, and you can find that out by checking our website. And I'm going to drop the link in the chat too for Meetup. Meetup is probably the best way to find these groups, and just go on there and see if there's one near you. And like I said a minute ago, if there's not, that's okay, because we're doing them online right now as well. So even if you're not in a place where there's one necessarily driving distance or walking distance, you can still participate and join in. So I definitely encourage you to check that out if you're interested in doing something like that. And also, Helen, you're also a support group leader, aren't you?
I am.
Yeah.
I do the virtual support group every first Sunday of every month in the evening. We run 7 p.m. Eastern time. If you join the meetup, you can find that group on there. And on occasion, I also host our only women's virtual support group. So this is we just started this up like couple months ago. It's for people that are a woman or a woman identifying, where you are on the woman spectrum, and talking about issues specifically when it comes to women and religion and our experiences with those. And so that has various times. Don't ask me the schedule because I'll forget, but it is it is online. It's available on the meetup and you can find it there.
Yes, excellent. Yeah, so feel free to use that link. And also, I believe for the women's group, it's also open for non-binary and gender fluid people as well.
Yep.
Yes, absolutely. Perfect. So that is fantastic. It's definitely a friendly space for all of that as well. So hope to see y'all there. And then you get to see Helen if you go to that one. So that's the best part. So
yes, everybody should just see me.
Yeah, I mean, that's the main reason to go.
Everything.
Of course. And then, so also all of these things that we've been describing are, of course, peer support, volunteer-led kinds of things, the helpline, the online community, and the support groups. But sometimes maybe we need a little bit more support than that from a trained mental health care provider. And so we have also set up the Secular Therapy Project, which is where we help to get you connected with a licensed secular mental health care provider. And the way this works is we have only mental health care providers who are carefully screened in order for them to participate, that they are appropriately licensed in their state and or county, and they maintain a secular practice, which means they're not going to be proselytizing. They're not going to be telling you things like, oh, okay, well, why don't you go pray on it some more, or anything like that. They're only going to be using evidence-based treatments and therapies that are backed up with empirical science, so that you won't have to worry about having some kind of issue exacerbated by being preached to when you thought you were going to get actual mental health care. So if you are interested in looking for a mental health care provider such as that, I'm going to drop a link in the chat for the Secular Therapy Project. So seculartherapy.org. Feel free to check that out. And then next we have our online community. Helen, do you want to tell us about that?
Yes. So like I said before, we're all in this together. So especially if everybody's has their own unique experiences within religious group, whether you're Mormon or former Catholic or Jehovah's Witness, or, some kind of new agey thing that you kind of got roped into, whatever it is. And our online community is a really good place to connect with people that are from similar backgrounds from you. And we not only have like religious group, we also have LGBTQ people, and we have a sex channel and a women's only channel. It's all types of people that you can connect to. The only thing is, though, that you have to be invited by an agent. This is not available out in the ethers of the internet. You have to call or chat into our hotline and have a discussion with an agent. And if they feel that you would be a good fit, you will get an invite, and that's how you join our online community. Also too, one that does not require an invite is the atheist community of Discord. Car's going to put a link into them. So if you're Discord friendly, you can connect with all the wonderful people on there. I'm on there, so you can talk to me.
As usual, Helen is the best part of everything.
I am the best part of everything. Right now they're streaming this RfRx talk, and they do it every Monday. Shout out to Nikki for doing that over there. And there's wonderful, supportive, great people on that platform as well. Also, if you like what we do, you've been coming, you got support from RfR, you are on the online community, or you have some free time that you would like to invest in making somebody a little bit better, we would love to have you volunteer. How do you do that? Well, you go to our website and you fill out a volunteer application and we will find a home for you. I started off as an agent, and now I do a bunch of different things. And if you want to edit videos for RfRx, if you want to help us on the tech side, if you want to help us do promotions, if you want to monitor the online chats, whatever it is, we will find you a home. So please consider volunteering. We're always looking for volunteers. And if you think there's anything that we need help on, let us know and we'll give you a job. We'll volunteer you. So please volunteer.
Be careful. Helen will volunteer you to do so.
I will volunteer you. I'm bossy.
No, that's fantastic. Helen is wonderful. So yeah, please feel free to join us. And I guess we should go ahead and get this started. What do you think, Helen?
Oh yeah, let's get this ball rolling.
Okay, let's do it.
So Christmas miracle.
Yes, it's a Festivus miracle.
It's a Festivus miracle. Yay!
Yes. So the miracle will be that we get through this program without me, skipping any steps or anything. So we're going to get there, though.
You're doing awesome, Cara.
Thank you. Well, you're the best co-host, so it had to be good. Okay, let's talk about this meeting. So it will be the same format that it always is. And just as a note, we have the closed captioning on all of these shows. So you should be able to see that on your screen. If you would like to have subtitles, you can enable those with the live transcription that is going on. So for anybody that prefers to use that, that is available. And we have that every week. So what we'll be doing is, just like always, we're going to have a discussion with our guest for about an hour. And then after that, we're going to move into the question and answer session. And so in order for us to have a question and answer session, we need questions from you all. So feel free during the presentation, if you have any questions that you would like to ask the presenter, go ahead and type those into the chat, and we'll be monitoring that to see if there's any questions that we can bring up at the end. So feel free to be thinking about those as we go and drop them in there. And then after that, we'll have closing thoughts with the wonderful Gayle Jordan, our Executive Director, who will give us some updates. and words of encouragement, as she always does. And then after that, we will move on to the super fun and exciting social hangout, which is where we turn off the recording and just have people allowed to talk and continue chatting about the topic that we've talked about this evening or other topics that come up. And sometimes our guests will stick around for the hangout as well to continue with the question and answer and engage there. So please feel free to stick around for that afterwards if you're interested in doing that. And let me introduce our guest, who I am super excited about. This evening we have Torah Bontrager. Again, she's back with us for, I believe it's the third time. And a little bit about Torah. She escaped in the middle of the night at age 15 so she could go to high school. She's the author of Amish Girl in Manhattan, and to her knowledge is the first female Amish escapee to graduate from the Ivy League. Her story's been featured on MTV and Forbes, among others, and today she advocates for the right of Amish children to go to school beyond the 8th grade. Torah founded the Amish Heritage Foundation, which focuses on making education a federal right and overturning the Supreme Court case Wisconsin v. Yoder, which she talked about a little bit last time. And I am also going to drop a resource into, or a link into the chat that is from this document called We the People of Faith report from Columbia Law School. And if you happen to click on that and want to follow along during the presentation this evening, that will be a useful resource for you. And we're also going to have a copy of Torah's slides available at the end as well. So look forward to that. And without further ado, let's go ahead and bring Torah on.
Hi, thank you so much, Tara, for having me back. It's one of my things that I look forward to is the Recovering from Religion episodes. They're just amazing, and it's an honor to be back and be able to share these different topics and issues that we're all interested in.
Yes, we're so glad to have you again.
Yeah, welcome back, Torah.
I never expected to be invited back, much less 3 times. So a huge honor. Thank you. All right, so tonight, as the title that we had discussed, it's the supremacy of religious rights in the shadow of a pandemic. And we are going to talk about specifically that Columbia Law School report that Kara mentioned. And in brief, in the United States, laws have been created and upheld that favor religious freedoms over the health and well-being of US citizens. Tonight, we'll discuss the supremacy of religious rights over other basic human rights, including education. And that's also a theme of the Amish Heritage Foundation's work and the topic of our upcoming conference.
I am so excited to hear your rundown on this report because I have not fully read it yet. So please tell us, what is this?
Well, it's something I really went down a rabbit hole with it, and I'm hoping I can get it condensed enough tonight that it, it keeps you interested and doesn't bore you. So that's my only worry.
Oh, you are never boring. Don't worry about that.
I always learn something cool when you're here. So
nice.
I'm excited.
Thank you. Okay. So essentially what the Columbia Law School's Law, Rights, and Religion Project, that's an institution under the law school, what they show is that the Supreme Court's COVID era opinions have created a hierarchy of constitutional rights, and of course, these religious rights at the top. And then we'll discuss tonight how this happened, how this affects everyday people, where we are headed, and what we can do about it. And then you all know my story. This is just for the benefit of people who might not know it or look at this later. And here's a cover of my book, but it's really about showing you my one and only photo of me in Amish clothes, and also of me as a practicing Amish person.
Oh, now, where can people find that book if they want a copy of it?
You can go to Amazon. You can just type in, Google Amish Girl in Manhattan, or, go to Amazon. You can also get it on bookshop.org, Ingram Sparks. So if all else fails, email me, call me, text me, but I'm pretty sure you shouldn't have an issue finding it online. So the first question, how did this happen? And just for anyone who's not seeing the visuals, there's a photo of We the People, that iconic We the People image with some bullets on it. And I felt that was a very timely example of what's going on in the country right now, like this intersection of Christian nationalism and all that kind of stuff. And so this is sort of what the report is referencing, not, gun rights only, but it's this religious drive behind putting rights, religious rights above everything else. So in a nutshell, late on a Friday evening in April of this year, 2021, over a year into the COVID-19 crisis, the Supreme Court issued a brief opinion that dramatically transformed constitutional law. In the midst of a once-in-a-lifetime global pandemic, the court ruled in Tandon versus Newsom that state and local governments seeking to curb the spread of the novel coronavirus may not restrict in-person religious gatherings more rigorously than any other type of activity, such as shopping for groceries or working at a warehouse. The opinion was only one in a barrage of cases filed in federal courts across the country, many brought by conservative legal nonprofits seeking to deny states and localities the power to apply COVID restrictions to religious practitioners. And if you're following along with the the We the People of Faith report, you can see that we're now on the cover. And I just want to give credit where credit is due, which this is copyright 2021 by Law, Rights and Religion Project, Columbia Law School. And you will have that information in your report as well.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing those references. It's always good to fact check even ourselves.
Yes, not only fact check, but also I try very hard to always give credit where credit is due. And even if it's not due, you should give it anyway if it's warranted. And everything I will be saying tonight about this supremacy of religious rights is taken directly from this report. It was authored primarily by Elizabeth Reiner Platt, who's the director of the Law, Rights and Religion Project. And I owe, of course, everything to her and her team for having this information. They do really great work. So if anyone's interested in knowing about more things about religious trauma, or just like our journey out of religion maybe, or away from religion into, the secular sphere, I would definitely recommend checking out other things that they do.
Excellent. And could we just like Google them and find their professional website that way?
Yes, and also it is on the second page of the report. You see
Excellent. It? Oh, all right. Secret Eric found it and put it in the chat.
Nice.
He's texting from the trunk of my car. How did this happen?
I love it. See, this is what happened. You wanted to know how this plays out in real life. Well, Eric gets, kidnapped and gets put into a trunk of a car.
That's the only way that me and Cara can dominate anything. So.
Right. To get him out of the way for a little bit.
Exactly.
Don't worry, he's fine.
All right, moving on. So dismissing evidence that group worship poses a graver threat of COVID transmission than many other activities, and that regulators can less easily monitor houses of worship for COVID compliance, the court has now ruled that treating any activity more favorably than religious exercise constitutes illicit and likely unconstitutional discrimination. The court's new interpretation of the First Amendment amounts to a radical expansion of constitutional protections. The Supreme Court's new approach provides religious activity with a level of constitutional protection greater than nearly any other fundamental right, including the right to free speech, abortion, and racial equality. In essence, the Supreme Court has adopted a view of the Constitution that ranks fundamental rights in this way. Religious liberty is now giving top-tier protection, while others, such as equality and reproductive liberty, enjoy lower-tier status. And this marks a fundamental change in the court's approach to constitutional rights. Now, I just want to say that this approach is how Wisconsin v. Yoder got decided. So everything in this report is not talking about the cases like Wisconsin v. Yoder. It's talking about this is now, this is, in my view, this is what whoever was behind Wisconsin v. Yoder, this was their goal all along. 50 years later, they have now finally gotten explicit ranking, like religious liberty is now at the top. This is what they've been working on all along. So now it's the norm instead of the exception.
Okay, yeah, as you were reading that, I was kind of thinking it sounds almost like it's almost just an inversion of how I would think before of it being that, well, religious groups or gatherings can't be discriminated against to the point that they're getting, more unfavorable treatment than anything else. But then it sounded like, as you were reading, that this decision almost kind of flipped that the other way, saying now they have to be treated the most favorably compared to anything. Is that right?
It is, and I myself cannot. I'm still working through the languaging, but I think it'll become more clear when we go into specific examples, and
Okay.
it will get backed up by exactly what you're saying. I just don't know how to re-say it, so just this is why I'm relying on the report, because it's still new. I'm still processing it and all of that, and getting my personal languaging correct around it, because it can be, legal ease kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is really helpful to have, someone kind of going through it and translating into English.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to skip ahead to the next page. I'm just taking excerpts of these pages. And if anyone has questions, do you have questions, we can always back up or, pause me. I can explain more, because there's just a ton of good stuff here. Yeah. So this is now the introduction section of page 5 of the report. And so they just go into a little bit more detail about what was happening in the spring of 2020, when states and localities issued unprecedented regulations limiting in-person gatherings in an effort to curb the virus's spread. In response, churches, ministers, and worshipers across the country began filing lawsuits challenging these orders and demanding the right to hold in-person group services despite the risks posed by the pandemic. And initially, the Supreme Court declined to exempt these religious practitioners from the coronavirus stay-at-home orders. Months later, however, after hundreds of thousands of Americans had died, the court began to reverse course, issuing decision after decision, requiring that religious activities be exempted from COVID health restrictions. Now, these opinions represented the culmination of a decades-long campaign by the conservative legal movement to expand the right to religious exemptions under the law. And that's what backs up my view on how Wisconsin v. Yoder was more or less like, it was the landmark precursor to what we see now.
Interesting.
In a series of cases over the 60s, 1960s, 70s, and 80s, the Supreme Court began to reconsider its longstanding denial of the constitutional right to religious exemptions. And there's a footnote, the first footnote here, and the footnote does mention Wisconsin v. Yoder and a couple other cases, to take a look at those to see what cases the court was, as examples of cases the Supreme Court was considering. So this report does not mention Yoder specifically, except for that very first footnote, which is, for me, validates again how important Yoder is, what, how much influence this, has in the religious right movement, and how important it is.
Yeah, that makes sense, given that, I am also not a legal scholar, but, my understanding is that, especially for Supreme Court rulings, legal precedent, it makes up a big part of how these cases are decided, so that they want to be consistent with the previous rulings. So it sounds as though this one has been foundational, perhaps, in these later decisions.
Yes, and it's been, when it was decided, the excuse by the Supreme Court justices was that, it's an exemption carved out for only this particular practicing religious group, and it's never going to apply to anyone else, which of course they knew was not true, but that was how it got, marketed. For among, if it came up among the public, but it did pass, pass through the shadow docket, which we'll get to a little bit later, which is also how all these COVID era opinions got through. So we'll explain a little bit more about what that shadow docket, what that means.
Yes,
but
please.
essentially, you're not getting the cases are not going through the proper kinds of trials and hearings that they should be.
Oh, and they're going all the way to the Supreme Court?
It's basically, it's exactly what you think of as a shadow. Like when you, so the docket is, all the cases that are, a legal term, which fact check me because I haven't looked up the definition, but it's a legal thing. Whatever the docket is basically like, here's a file cabinet of cases that people want the Supreme Court to look at, and they'll decide which cases they're going to look at, and then of those cases they'll decide how much trial and hearing and all of that stuff is going to happen around it. And the shadow docket means it's basically like the prosecutors, attorneys, all those involved with the case, and the Supreme Court justices have just decided to, let's rule, make a decision over the dinner table behind closed doors, more or less, is how that process takes place.
I see. Yeah, I'm looking at that now on the American Bar Association. Yeah,
Good.
it looks like what you're describing, where they don't have to do all of the public debate and discussion and the lengthy oral arguments, but can actually just give a quick decision for something because it's considered an emergency circumstance.
Well, it is considered emergency or something else. I don't know what it was considered as for the Wisconsin v. Yoder case, because that literally amounted to only an hour of oral hearing. 1 hour of oral hearing led to this case, and the public wasn't aware of it. I mean, think about this. If no one is aware of what's happening with, what this report is talking about in the social media era, where we have a lot more access and publicity, able to spread the word. Think about in the 1970s when there wasn't social media. It was so much easier to get these things through on the shadow docket. And 1 hour of just hearing whoever both sides decided should be put on the stand, and that was it. And it's shocking. If anybody's interested, you can Google and get the actual audio recording of that hearing that led to Yoder.
It all seems really shady. I don't like it. I'm not a fan.
Yeah.
It's all very shady.
Very shadowy.
Yeah.
And I have my interns listen to the recording as part of their education on the Yoder case, and they always come back with just shock and anger and all the appropriate responses, and it's such a shock to what we think justice and democracy is about.
Right.
Yeah,
I didn't even know about this.
Yeah, so this is how this particular Tandem versus Newsom and other COVID era cases came. Lots of these that got ruled in favor of religion came about is the same sort of like shady, shadowy process. So here's just a couple more lines to add for those who know about employment division versus Smith, which in the previous presentation I did, someone had brought up that question. And so they, in this report, point out employment versus Smith in 1990, that the Supreme Court backtracked. It backtracked on some of the Yoder provisions. And it ruled that the employment division versus Smith, or that would invalidate some of the Yoder ruling. So Employment Division versus Smith says that religious practitioners must abide by all neutral and generally applicable laws, even those that unintentionally burden religious exercise. So there's a piece of the Yoder case that got invalidated basically by Employment Division versus Smith. Since then, a group of conservative litigators and activists have worked diligently to overrule or limit this aspect of Smith. So this would reinstate Yoder in full. And they've now succeeded in the most unlikely of circumstances by gaining the right to constitutional exemptions from emergency regulations issued during a once-in-a-lifetime public health crisis.
Wow. So it almost sounds as though, someone was taking advantage of these circumstances to literally just push through a bunch of seemingly unrelated cases. Like, this doesn't sound to me like something that would be related to a pandemic, but
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Very interesting. And so they were able to push this through, or you're probably going to tell us about this next, but like using this shadow docket.
Yes. Yeah. And so we'll go to, just the page 7 of the report for whoever's following along. So basically, under the heading of COVID litigation and the Supreme Court, there's a lot more information about how these arguments were made by religious objectors in the COVID-19 cases. The cases were developed earlier. Cases that were developed in earlier waves of litigation, such as the Affordable Care Act's contraceptive mandate, state and local sexual orientation anti-discrimination laws, and same-sex couples' right to marry, they couldn't get those pushed through, those revoked. But now they can. Like, this is a consequence of the Supreme Court putting this religious rights at the top of the hierarchy.
Oh, I see. Now, how would that work if they decided, okay, we want to challenge one of these other things? How does this allow them to do that better now?
So this is where I have actual concrete examples coming up, which I don't trust myself trying to say it, by memory, because I haven't memorized it. It's so technical. So, but I have these real, actual, concrete examples, which is going to shock you. But I have one more paragraph to read, and this is the shadow docket thing, where it says the Supreme Court's approach to exemption changes changed dramatically with the death of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the immediate appointment of Amy Coney Barrett to fill her seat. So that's like, what happened? How did we get here?
Oh, my heart is hurting thinking about that. That is absolutely tragic.
Beginning in November 2020, just 1 year ago, the court granted nearly every religious exemption request it received. This change happened over the course of months and entirely on the court's shadow docket, meaning without the benefit of full trials or extensive briefing. And in many cases, the court issued decisions with no majority opinion at all, leaving lower courts and legislatures to guess what types of restrictions on houses of worship the court might uphold. While the Supreme Court's opinions haven't always been clear, they will, as discussed in other parts of the report later, have a dramatic impact on governors and other elected officials' ability to govern. So what's your response to that?
Oh, wow. I'm still kind of reeling from where you started there with this kind of, growing out of, RBG's passing and very untimely passing, and how, if people were able to roll over in their grave and be aware of what was happening after their death, I think that she would be, just to realize, she was the architect of so many of the other freedoms and rights that you described, which are now being threatened by this. It's almost like just a slap in the face to her legacy.
Yeah.
It just pisses me off. I'm just mad.
I'm
mad and pissed off. So
yeah,
it's awful.
Wow. And is there nothing to be done? Are we just rolling down this path full speed now? Is there opposition? tell us everything.
Yeah. So that was the basis for the poll questions was, how do we push back? How do we, work for justice, push back on this injustice. And one example that comes to mind is, the Texas abortion law, that crazy, law that they, wrote it in such a way that the state claims they can't be sued or held responsible. That is a direct result of not only what this report is talking about, but also like it built on 50 years of past attempts at getting to this point. And so there are a couple lawsuits where people are not anti-abortion, but it's just to challenge the Texas abortion case. So if you follow that, I feel that's a very good thing to keep your eye on to see what is being done or what might possibly need to happen in order to reverse it. And for me, I feel there is, I don't know how much time we want to discuss, but there's definitely term limits on Supreme Court justices. That's one step that can be taken. These are all, of course, longer term things, not immediate short term things, but still things that I feel should be addressed, or increasing the number of the people who sit on the court, so it's not so easy to skew it conservative or not conservative, one way or the other. And then it's sort of similar to the Wisconsin v. Yoder case, which is we have to argue somehow that what is being done, the decisions that are being made by the current Supreme Court are in fact unconstitutional.
Which, now that is an interesting argument, because isn't it the Supreme Court that determines whether or not laws are constitutional? So who checks that? Is there a check for that?
It has not, like, technically or theoretically, there isn't. Theoretically, the US Supreme Court is the check, is the pure, unbiased, arbiter of what's constitutional and isn't. But clearly, they are humans with biased interests and, able to be pressured or coerced or paid off, just like anybody else. And clearly, they've made lots of rulings that were not, that constitutional law experts disagree with. And it's mostly been confined to sort of like the legal community, the finer points of, is this constitutional or not? And so the argument to really have the authority to challenge the US Supreme Court, you have to know constitutional law and understand state versus federal, like what falls in the jurisdiction of states and what falls in the jurisdiction of federal. And now the anti-abortion group has been arguing ever since Roe v. Wade that is not a federal jurisdiction, that's a state jurisdiction issue. And so that's the path they're taking to try to keep, to overturn Roe v. Wade. And education, is not, in terms of Wisconsin v. Yoder, like, education actually is not a right in the Constitution, an explicit right. It is not explicit. You have the explicit right to vote, serve on a jury, other things, but there's no mention of right. And so what my work and the Amish Heritage Foundation's work is about is to show, well, actually to argue that we have an implicit federal constitutional right to education, because we cannot fulfill or exercise our explicit rights, such as the right to serve on a jury and do that job properly, if we can't, if we don't understand law or have never, or don't understand civics or don't speak English fluently, whatever the case might be. So that's one way of approaching overturning the U.S. Supreme Court's cases is just you have to be better at arguing and interpreting and getting your interpretation across to the other side. And then, of course, there's also another way where you can go through the legislation and get Congress to pass laws. And if you, like, say, pass, if you get every state to put education as a right in their constitution, that negates Yoder, basically, and like makes it irrelevant. It doesn't negate it, but it makes it irrelevant.
Okay. But I guess obviously the people who are in favor of that kind of legislation are working in the opposite direction, trying to make states invalid or validate it. You know what I mean?
Well, there's, yeah, I mean, there are some states who naturally are more pro-education and others who are naturally, I mean, it seems that higher education, a quality, adequate education tends to go with people who are more democratic. And, educational deprivation or inadequate education tends to go with people who are more conservative. And, there's, the question could be, well, why is that? Because clearly the Ted Cruzes and Donald Trumps of the world have all gotten not only a good education, but one of the best, Ivy League. They went to Ivy League schools. So, they clearly value a higher education, or someone did that, paid for them to go to school or whatever. So that's the question, like, what's going on there? And I think that's, a great topic to explore just by itself, is sort of like, why is it that some people abuse their knowledge, their higher, education, and others don't? Because it seems like what I see is that it kind of depends on the person. Like, some people use it for good, other people use it as a way to maintain or get power. And the best way, and I always go back to the Amish population, the Amish system, which is, that's the best way to keep your thumb on a whole group of people, is by keeping them ignorant and, uneducated, aware of their rights, and keeping them in fear of, what would happen if you go against them.
And also too, like, for them, for people that are like mega rich and they get like they're paid basically, they pay the schools, because do you think Donald Trump could get into like a really good Ivy League school on his education and merits alone? No.
No.
But only certain people are allowed that education. And the rest of the populace isn't allowed, because there's only certain types of people that are allowed to achieve this education, and that class of people and stuff like that. So I think there's a little bit of that going on as well, and to keep people ignorant, don't give them an education, don't explain about their rights, the things that are happening, behind the scenes that you're not paying attention to. And also too, is also to keep that class separation in place as well. That's, I think that's a little bit of what's going on, on top of that.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there's all sorts of things at play. I totally agree with you. I mean, it's just way too complex to go into detail.
Oh yeah.
Without going down a rabbit trail or
we can talk about this for hours. So
yeah,
this could be an hours and hours of conversation.
Yeah.
So, but
I hope y'all are ready. This is going to be a 5-hour discussion, so get comfortable.
And you'll be mad for 90% of it.
Yeah.
Well, and I know we kind of got you off track here, but like, we've talked about the education, we've talked about the abortion rights. Like, you were going to tell us some other examples of decisions that are coming down the pipe as well. Like, what else are we dealing with here?
So your question, like, how does this affect everyday people? And that starts on page 12 of the report. I have a paragraph here that you can find in the report, but I'm going to just jump to the specific examples, not the general topics. And that is, A religious nonprofit seeking an exemption from paying the state minimum wage could now argue that the law is discriminatory since it exempts contract and tipped work, but not religious work. And in the previous part of the report, it talks about how there have always been some carve-outs, exemptions. And there's always this act of balancing what's in the best interests for the citizens in general as a whole, which is why we have, certain exemptions for contract work according to whoever decided on the exemption, or certain exemptions for women-owned businesses, for example. So now, yes, so a religious nonprofit does not have to pay the state minimum wage. A large for-profit company owned by a religious person who believes that women shouldn't hold positions of authority over men could argue that a workplace anti-discrimination law is discriminatory since it exempts small businesses, but not businesses with religious owners. So here's a very, even more specific example.
I smell sexism.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I smell it. I don't like it. It's bad.
Well, and we've already seen challenges like this, like with the Hobby Lobby decision.
Yes.
It wasn't exactly the same, but it was basically exempting them from, allowing healthcare for women.
Right. And now it's just going directly for let's exempt based on sex, gender.
And my concern too, like we were talking about legal precedent before, if these things start happening, now that the Supreme Court is stacked and they pass these, rulings behind, basically the America's backs, that now the precedent is being set up that down the line, when people are trying to overturn these laws, these things that are happening, that they're going to be like, what's legal precedent? And it's going to be even more of a challenge to turn those things over again. And that's the thing that's giving me like the pit in my stomach, that what's going to happen down the line.
Yeah. You're totally right. And yes, the longer something remains the law, the longer it acquires this precedence, right? And so, I totally hear you on the panic of like, what happens if this doesn't get, undone quickly enough. But that's where I would, the optimistic response to that, or the positive response is, nothing is ever set in stone. If it really is unconstitutional, there's never a statute of limitations on exercising that, or arguing like this is unconstitutional, even if it's been in place for hundreds of years. I mean, think of, women not having been allowed to vote, for example, for hundreds of years. And finally, that got changed. But none of it is easy or like relieving. It gives you much peace of mind. And then here's the last example, which is parents. And here's just, again, like it gets even worse. Parents whose religious beliefs support corporal punishment could argue that even if a child abuse law contains no exemptions, a state's decision to not press charges in certain circumstances, such as when the parent is also experiencing violence, should be taken as a de facto exemption, making the law discriminatory towards religion. Do you get what is being done here?
Okay. Run me through that, because I think I understand what you're saying, but I want to make sure I understand exactly what you're saying.
Yes. So this is why I did not go into this, off the top of my head before, because it's too technical.
Yeah, this is very complex.
Yeah. So this is saying that, okay, so let's suppose a case comes in front of the state in which a parent was beating their child. And it could have been that the parent, and they're saying the parent is also experiencing violence. Well, it could have been that this particular spouse's partner or whoever perhaps like force the parent to beat their child. And so in this case, the state could make an exemption under the child abuse law. saying we're not going to press charges because the parent abused their child under duress.
Oh, the duress
And
being basically their head of household was operating under the assumption that this was their religious belief, and therefore they could compel their family members to participate as well.
well, yeah, I don't, that would be a case by case thing. That would be something that I, would be interested in seeing. Can like, say in the case of the Amish, let's use that, the Amish wife who is mandated by the religion to obey her husband no matter what. The husband is ordering the wife to beat the child, but not, just saying, the husband might never have threatened the wife with physical retribution if she didn't do that, but it's just understood that it's, by the religion, you're supposed to do that. Would that be considered violence, meet that standard or a level of violence? I don't know. Those are all like things that would be determined in a specific case. What I'm thinking of is, let's say the husband told the wife she needs to beat the kid. The kid didn't do anything wrong. The wife might, try to say, the kid does not deserve being beaten. The kid didn't do anything wrong. And the husband's like, beats the wife, keeps beating her, says he's not going to, stop until she beats the kid. So I'm thinking of that as a more extreme, more obvious example of, easily, like a easily demonstrated example of violence. Like physical is always easier than non-physical.
Okay.
I just find it that I'm sorry, that that's going to be kind of difficult to prove.
I think I get it. Yeah, because that's what she's saying, right? It's like, if there's ever a circumstance where they could say, well, we're not going to file charges in this case because, maybe this person was under duress, then it sounds like what this is saying is that could be taken by a religious person to say, oh, aha, you didn't file charges in this case over here, so now you can't ever file charges against a religious person whose beliefs say that you should use corporal punishment, because now you're unfairly discriminating against religious belief.
Absolutely, 100%.
What the fuck?
Oh my goodness. This
What
goes back to that thing you said at the beginning about how now there can never be a circumstance where a religious organization is subject to a rule that someone else was not subject to.
And I'm just feeling a little bit trepidatious, especially like in cases of like sexual abuse. And like, in the Catholic Church and the Jehovah's Witnesses, and all this childhood sexual abuse that's coming out, that this could be a precedent for them to say, well, we get religious exemption. Like it just smells fishy and bad. Like I'm not a fan.
You are right on target, Helen. That is exactly where this is going to lead to. I would bet my life on there, there is going to be at least one attempt by the Catholic Church or any other religious, organization to get out of being try to keep from being prosecuted for child sexual abuse or any other kind of sexual abuse based on this.
Because my concern is that, like for the Jehovah's Witnesses, they have all these bylaws within their religion about how they handle those types of cases. And we're supposed to have a separation of church and state, where the state can come in and say, well, fuck you, you're still breaking the law, you're still abusing kids. And now we have this religious exemption thing coming and going, well, I can use this and we're going to handle it internally and you can't investigate us now. And that's the thing that's making me really nervous, and it's bad, and not a fan. It's bad. It's really bad.
I mean, it's hard enough right now. I mean, there's so many, religious freedom exemptions claimed already. The Amish Church being one, just one of many, closed religious groups where they just have this de facto, autonomy, sort of, and now it's even more impossible going to be. Like the rare cases that do come in front of the court, I just can't imagine that there's any hope of any charges getting pressed now, knowing this.
Well, yeah. And, you mentioned this being kind of a long game that's being played here with these decisions sort of compounding on themselves. Where do you think this is headed? Like, what is the end game that we're moving towards here? What do you think the goal is of all this?
Well, here's that question. Where are we headed?
It's almost like I knew that was the next slide.
Yeah.
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 You're
Well,
psychic, Kara.
Ask Rob about that.
You're on the wavelength here. So this decade looks bleak. Honestly, it's bleak. I have a lot of conversations with, people in politics, policymakers, game theory, people in all that kind of stuff, economic and political game theory. They're like, it just looks bleak. And they are, predicting an attempt at civil war, in this insurrection kind of thing. If Trump is, like even worse than January 6th, that same kind of attempt, if Trump is reelected in 24 and tries to get elected again in 28. So they're predicting that. And to me, the racism and sexism, like this, the reason for all this bleakness is driven by old white males clinging to every last thing they can to stay in power as they see the demographics of the US changing towards secularism and non-white multiculturalism. And the Texas abortion ban is, one of those examples of this recent attempt at creating and maintaining a Christian patriarchal theocracy. And I would say that they have achieved this theocracy with the Supreme Court now that it's 6-3. And that's really, I see it as our, as a monarchy, our version of a theocratical or theocracy. I don't know if theocratical, is that a word?
We're gonna make
it is now. It's a word now, Torah. It is now.
And so the next slide, let's not dwell too much on that, because here's the next decade. So the decade after the 2020s looks a whole lot better. Younger generations of secular or nons, those who don't affiliate with any religion, will have grown into positions of power and authority in politics, policy, education, and so forth. And, the better educated you are, the more likely you are to vote Democratic. And that trend has been building since 1980. The next slide, I think I was going to take that out of this part, but here's how I'm backing up why I think this is happening. So basically, sort of like we talked about this before, Helen, you mentioned this about wealth. Like the wealthier you are, the more likely you are to vote Republican, and that's been true for nearly 100 years. At the same time, the better educated you are, the more likely you are to vote Democratic, and that trend has been building since 1980. And this is from a professor who wrote a book. So this is by Bill Schneider, who's a professor at the Schar School of Policy and Government at George Mason University and the author of Standoff: How America Became Ungovernable. And so that's, he sort of breaks down this whole thing about, he has this take on the diploma, he calls it the diploma divide in American politics, so the educational gap and how that's playing out. So the Pew Research Center just came out with on the 14th of this month with their latest stats about 3 in 10 US adults are now religiously unaffiliated. That's amazing. That just keeps, going for us. Self-identified Christians make up 63% of the US population this year, down from 75%. Down from 75% a decade ago? Wait a minute. Am I like misreading this?
Yeah, no, I think that's right.
No, that is right. That because I'm like all of a sudden I'm like 75%. Okay, no, that is right. My brain obviously can't process numbers at night.
Math is hard.
So this is all to say, that the next decade, by default, is going to be better based on the trends we're seeing.
Okay.
Do you get, am I making sense on this, Cara?
Yes. Yeah. So basically you're saying the people who are building this theocracy are hanging on to a legacy that is rapidly kind of waning, and they're presumably going to be more and more outnumbered as time goes by. Is that it?
Yes.
Basically?
Yeah. And I heard a very interesting statistic by a progressive outlet the other day that I believe 75% or like most of the Washington Post's readers are like 60s or older. Very few people like our generation, my generation and younger, is not going to the Washington Post for their information, which is amazing. So I think like that's also something, like that's one of the positives that has come out of social media platforms, like people having the ability to create their own channels and put out their, of course it comes at a great cost. Look at what's happening, with the misinformation, disinformation, all that kind of stuff. But so that would be my one, concern, is that if we don't get education, made a right and enforced, then the 30s are not necessarily like they're vulnerable, because the younger generation can go left or right, and what seems to keep them from going conservative is education. And if that is missing, that ingredient is missing, they're going to be the new theocracy.
Okay.
Do you think there's like some kind of like, there's been a lot of discourse about like not trusting, experts, not trusting people that have higher education, not learning critical race theory or something like that, like all these different things that are trying to keep like young people from wanting to pursue a higher education, to go into college and stuff like that, even though it's really important, because studies are showing now that you will not make a good income unless you have a college education. You're not going to get into the pay pool that they need to. You can't do that on a high school education anymore. So I'm just wondering if there's like this push from the right, telling young people to distrust people that are experts, distrust people that have an education.
Yeah, like why that's happening, my theory is that it's so they can retain the control of their agenda, and they can also create their clones, their mini-me's, to carry this on. And so clearly, the ones on the right who have an elite education or top education, a good education, are clearly know the value, but it's this example of they're using it for a negative reason.
Right.
And they're, they value it, but they don't want anyone else to have it, because then, they know as well as we do that the trend is the better educated you are, the more likely you are
the more liberal that you're going to be.
Yeah. And they don't want that to happen. And it's sort of like, in a way, I guess, like if you think of survival, Darwin's theory, survival, that kind of thing, this drive to stay alive. There's this drive for the theocracy. If you think of this theocracy, Christian nationalism kind of thing, as a entity, it wants to stay alive, and this is its only way of staying alive, is if the young generations don't become educated.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting point, given that, a lot of this, kind of evangelical religious right, in many cases are, I think, believing in literal interpretations of the biblical text that would be challenged by, even a middle school education, if your children were exposed to, things like geology or,
Mhm.
biology, chemistry. I mean, any of the basic sciences would challenge these, literalist interpretations of, the earth being created in 6 days and these sorts of things. So, I mean, I can see how that would be also a direct threat, just, from a practical standpoint
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
on board with this.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, this is speaking of critical race theory, like why is the right, or this certain pieces of the right, religious right, so easily sold on this critical race theory? Because you can fact check this with one click, even if if you don't know about this. And so it's sort of like it's become very Amish, this whole trend, this whole like political divide. Like where it's like this doubling down, like getting like more extreme and more extreme.
Right. And I mean, I think you're right. It's a lot of, fear mongering where, it's a good way to get people all whipped up into a frenzy about something, and they're not going to fact check what is critical race theory and where is it being taught, because that's not the point. The point is to get people all excited and angry and emotional, and then they're going to buy whatever else we're feeding along with it. And fact checking isn't the point.
Like they don't do the thing where like, do I have to panic about this? Like that's what I do. Like, is this something I should be worried about? And then I do a little bit of research and go, no, not really. This is fine. This, what you're talking about, is the stuff that I'm worried about, like stripping away of rights that's going on in the background that is slowly going to trickle down and affect everyday people. You're not going to feel it right now, but in a couple of years, you're going to feel it. And especially if you're, a person of color, or you're in the LGBTQ community, or you're any of these marginalized group, you're going to feel it quicker than the white people, the straight people that are going to feel it, and that's the thing that's so scary about this whole thing, is that and this is what I find, and this is what really bothers me, is that they, these people that are extremely religious, they don't care about long-term effects. They think Jesus is going to come and the rapture is going to happen and all this bullshit. They're not thinking long-term and what this is going to do long-term to our country and the people that live here and all that sort of thing, and the precedent we're setting for other democratic countries around the world. And that is also a concern as well. So I mean, granted, yes, I am hopeful that, like, from what I see from my own children and, younger generations that are, not in their 40s. So, I'm definitely hopeful for that. But the whole thing just is bad. It stinks and it's bad. And I don't like it. I'm not a fan. Do not like it.
Yeah. And this is, one of the things, I mean, I'm asking Elizabeth Reiner Platt, Professor Platt, to speak at our conference and talk about this. And she hasn't said yes yet, so I don't want to say she's confirmed, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed. And I really want her to address the education piece, because I feel like this is the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
Like nobody is talking about that. Like, and I see it over and over, how Yoder is footnoted or winked at or, dismissed or whatever, but it's not actually talked about. Like in one of those examples that I just gave, one of them should be education. You can now, in a state, any state, you can say, I mean, you could always do this because there's no federal right to education, but you can for sure do it now. Say, I'm not sending my child to school, and I'm not homeschooling my child, and I'm not teaching them English or anything, and I'm going to make them work in my business, and I have that right. I mean, Yoder already gave people that right, but very few people knew about it. Only, certain, pretty much the Christian religious right was pretty much the only people who were, aware of that and really invested in that. But now anybody with this report, and the latest developments, they can just, it's really easy. They don't have to, fight as much to get this exemption for themselves.
I just find it really interesting how the Supreme Court now is interpreting constitutional law. I think we took it for granted that we had a separation of religion and state in the United States. And now through some careful manipulation of how they interpret the law, they gave all these religious exemptions to religious groups and stuff like that. And I find it really interesting, the fact that the way they're interpreting these laws is in their favor, favor, which it was supposed to be in more secular people, like, or even if you wanted to worship Bob the Wonder Toast, you got the same protections. But now it seems that the evangelical right is fighting for their own protections and the things that they want to do.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Yeah.
And that's an ideology that is not exactly compatible with this idea of democracy and freedom of religion. I mean, the Old Testament Bible is not talking about religious liberty. It's not part of it. And if that's what we're implementing, that sounds, directly in conflict with, what we think of as American values and our rights and liberties, despite how patriotic they may want to make it sound. That is very disturbing.
Yeah. And I also just wanted to point out the religious trauma aspect of how what comes up, and with specifically with education, from an undereducated or deprived background, religiously mandated background, where you're not allowed to question or encouraged to question. You don't know how to think critically. You don't know what questions to even ask about critical race theory, because you believe those in power and authority, right? They're supposed to be telling you the truth. And so, I think there's this triggering, at least for me, I experienced some of that. Who can I trust? I've been burned so much, I've been lied to. How do I know how to discern whether someone is telling the truth or a certain source is giving me the accurate information? And I feel like I haven't, done much research specifically into this yet specifically, but I feel like there's a lot of triggering that might be coming up. What do you think?
Yes, this is a big issue. For me too. This definitely came up in my upbringing as well, is kind of what you were describing when you're growing up in this system where you're constantly learning that you're supposed to listen to those in authority over you and obey unquestioningly. That kind of leaves you without a lot of critical thinking skills or habits once you come out from under that. And, I have conversations like this with members of my family where they're saying, oh, well, you're saying this, but someone else thinks something different. So, we just have no way to know what's true.
Everybody has their own truth.
I mean, I'm laughing because otherwise I'd just scream, but I so totally relate. Yeah.
Yeah. It's there's no way to referee ideas if you grow up learning that you just accept what someone tells you if they're in an authority. But now if you have competing ideas, you have no way of investigating on your own. I think that's such a critical part of, no pun intended, education that also, kids are missing out on. If they're missing out on education, they're missing out on learning how to critically evaluate ideas and fact check, and not just fact check other people, but fact check themselves, like we were talking about earlier. Where did I get this information? Am I engaging in motivated reasoning? And where's Rob? He can tell us about this.
Well, also too, for those of us on the opposite end, where I grew up Catholic, but my dad was very scientifically minded and taught me to question things, and being on the other side, when you see people that are so locked in and they don't want to question. And if you push them and you say like, hey, maybe you're not going to get a microchip in your arm if you get the vaccine, just saying that the government's not really tracking you. You already have a phone.
Exactly.
Like,
right.
Those type of conversations.
Card, you have a credit card, debit
yeah, I'm like,
card.
they're already tracking you, honey.
Yeah.
Like, but when you have someone that believes crazy things because they don't know how to critically think, they don't know how to vet information, they don't know how those of us that have had a certain amount of education, we know how to vet things, we know how to fact check, we know how to look things up, we know what consensus is and all that type of stuff. Like, you can't explain that to a person that thinks that the government is putting a microchip in their arm and they're being tracked and the earth is flat. It's really hard. And you're just fighting against that wall of people not learning critical thinking and not learning or they say they're skeptics, but they're even skeptical about what is fact and reality. And that is also really frustrating.
Well, I think that's definitely part of the talking points of the theocracy.
Right.
Like they put out the critical race theory and research for yourselves kind of thing. That was created by them, and it just The thing is that and they also talk about they deride higher education, even though they themselves are educated by top universities, and so that further keeps people who have transitioned out of extreme religions and might have had a chance at getting on this path towards higher education, evolving out of like the negative aspects of religion, like they're just wrote right back into this state of not enough education, not knowing how to exercise critical thinking skills or develop that.
Well, and I mean, you really do kind of bring it back around full circle, like with what you started with, that education really is a key critical piece to this, and it's not unrelated. Kind of to wrap it back up, what should we do? Where do we go from here?
Well, I wanted to have a site ready where you could petition, like send a petition to your local representatives, senators, Congress people, and unfortunately was not able to have that ready, but we are planning to have this ready to go in January. So if you would like to have a site that you can go to with 1 or 2 clicks, look up who your Congress people are, and then send out a formatted letter to them about making education a right through Congress, then we can do that. And and you can do that every single day for the rest of your life until education is a right.
Excellent.
And the other thing, so our plan is like, we want everybody, like we want all the states, people from all the states lobbying, petitioning, calling, texting, or sending this letter to their representatives. Like, do it as often as you can, however often you feel, but just keep this on their radar, because then they will be compelled to do something to make some, and of course, like our goal is to get someone to sponsor a bill, and we don't feel that that's too difficult to do. It's whether or not it's going to get passed. That's, we can easily find like Bernie Sanders or somebody, who's pro education, for everyone to sponsor this. But then of course it's the work of getting it passed.
And also to kind of tag on to that, like people have to start getting involved in their own local governments, even down to, who's on your who's on your school board.
Yes. Thank you for bringing that up. Oh my gosh. Thank you.
Because we tend to focus on national things, but like I live in Florida.
Oh yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff going on statewide that I am not happy about.
Mm-hmm.
And that starts in your own communities. You know, how are these laws affecting like people on the ground? You know, like all this grassroots movement that has to start happening, because we tend to look at the big picture, but if you're not paying attention to what's going on in your own backyard, you're going to get sideswiped. So it has to start with getting educated what's going on in your own jurisdiction and what is happening and the laws that are being passed, and then go to the state and then go federal.
Yes.
You know, build from the bottom and go up.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's one of the things that is part of this site that we're developing, you know, this different ways that you can participate with this, is like getting this on the ballot on a state level. You know, how do we go about doing that? And that for each state. And then, like you mentioned, the school board, that is so important. It's such ties totally right into everything we've been talking about, which is the religious right has been torpedoing school board meetings, like all, like constantly in this past year, especially. Where they, you know, they're trying to change laws where they can, you know, like have a seat on the board, and they don't even have kids or live in that district. You know, it's that extreme. Or they'll just hijack the school board meetings and bring up all these conspiracy, you know, things, or these, you know, like,
there's a guy that yelled about anal sex at a school board meeting, and he was all worried about anal sex in some book in like children and like at junior high school, and he lost his shit. Had nothing to do with what they were talking about. They were talking about COVID mandates, and he went on a 15-minute rant about anal sex. So
that is happening. And at first, you know, I thought, oh, these are, you know, lunatics, you know, exemptions, you know, like, or exceptions to what usually happens. But I've been noticing, like, this is coming up more and more and more. And so everyone who's on here listening to this, if you, you know, are in a school district where you can, you know, get on the board, please do that, and you know, monitor and see what's happening, because these school board administrators, like, too many of them themselves are buying into this nonsense, this craziness.
Well, and like even in my own district, like, you know, like where I live, we were fighting against like the state mandates, because like I happen to live in a somewhat reasonable county. So, but like, and this is the thing, like, even if you don't have kids in school, you should be really paying attention to what your school board is doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You know, because this is affecting kids, and it's going to have a trickle effect, because like what affects, like the micro will affect the macro. That's what I always say. You know, the micro will affect the macro.
Well, and this is, just such another really great example of how this topic really is affecting, you know, everyone at all these different levels. I'm really glad you brought that up. And Torah, I'm going to drop the other resources that you provided, the links to those in the chat. And as we wrap up and go on to the Q&A session, because I know we have so much more to say about this, and we could go on forever and ever and ever, but we do need to get to the Q&A to hear from everybody. Is there anything else that you want to mention before we do that?
Yes, just a reminder, the Education and Religion Conference is coming up in April. So that's something, again, like, we will have the date and everything finalized 1st of January. But here's just some information if you want to circle back later and you're interested in seeing the topics we cover in the lineup. And it'll all be related to the things we discussed tonight and things that I've discussed before in other appearances.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, we will definitely check that out. And this has been, as always, just super timely. We knew we were not going to be bored. We knew that wasn't going to happen. And I think we do have some questions.
I feel like I feel like I got a terrible Christmas gift. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I love you, Torah.
I totally feel you. I do. The you know, ignorance sometimes is bliss, right? Until it no longer is, until it's too late.
Until it hits us in the face with
exactly.
Yeah. Well, I know we've had a lot of activity in the chat with people wanting to get involved here. Helen, do we have any questions from
Yeah,
the chat
I
for
have one.
Torah?
So
Excellent.
this first one is, would imposing term limits on federal justices require a constitutional amendment? All I see is Article 3 is during good behavior. Does this imply a lifetime?
I'm glad you brought up the good behavior thing. So that's something is open to interpretation, and it would take somebody invested and knowledgeable to challenge it, to say this is not good behavior. Like, how do you define it? It's very super vague. And then the other thing is the term limits, if anything is happening with enacting that, passing that into law. Is that the question, Helen?
Yeah. Would imposing term limits on federal justices require a constitutional amendment? That was the first part of the question.
Okay. I don't know. You can Google it. And I Googled something right before I came on. I didn't have time to actually read it, but there has been a bill introduced in the Senate or the House, I forget which, last year, I believe. And I don't know what the status is on that. So I would say Google it and see what's going on.
Do your own research.
Do your own research.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what happened with that. I know there was talk about, adding more, like changing the number of justices on the court. And that was really what I was looking at. And then happened to see that there was a bill about introducing term limits, imposing term limits.
All right. Well, we will definitely keep an eye on that. That was one of the things that a lot of people chose in the poll earlier. Oh, in fact, did we ever talk about that? Do we want to share those poll results, or?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I would love to know what that is.
I want to see what people said.
Yeah, because I think that was the number one answer that people were interested in here in our group. Yeah. Okay. Can y'all see that? Am I sharing it?
Yes, I can see that.
Perfect. Yeah, it looks like 38% chose imposed term limits as their idea for the best solution as well. So in our little straw poll, that was the popular one. It's like followed by filing an extreme case that it makes the Supreme Court's rulings fall apart. And then 21% increased the number of Supreme Court justices. And then I'm curious as well for some other ideas that people had. We'll definitely want to get to that maybe later on in the Q&A here. But that was a very interesting question, Torah. I'm glad we got to poll the room on that.
Yes, I'm glad that it got the green light from you, because I was curious. I actually thought that people would increase the number of the Supreme Court justices, like that would be equally equal with the term limits. So it's interesting for me to see that that's not the case.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So it sounds like we're on the same page there. Will be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah.
But okay, well, let's do at least one more question. I know we talked on and on, but we've got a lot of interest here. Someone else was wondering if has there been a legal challenge to the Christian Bible where it instructs people to live according to the law of the land? I guess that question, it sounds like, is probably asking, has there been a challenge to basically say, hey, stop, you need to live according to the laws in the country that we live in now, not the laws put forth in your text from another time and place?
I mean, I don't know of a particular case, but that's not to say that there might not be one. But what I do know that's related to that is the Amish, certain Amish, mostly offshoots who are New Order versus traditional Amish. They call themselves newer. They're a little bit more, of course, like modern, have more modern conveniences, and then get more evangelical, actually. And there's a huge evangelical born again influence that has grown in the past 50 years in conjunction with what we're seeing with these religious liberties developments. So their interpretation, or what they're starting to sort of like push, is that this verse about give unto Caesar's what is Caesar's. Do you know that verse? I think that is a verse.
Yes, it was the one
I
about
think it's
paying
in
your
Romans.
taxes.
Yes. Is that what it is? Okay. Yeah. So they're kind of like, there's a certain faction, certain groups of Amish or Amish offshoots who say, well, that's, sort of like that's why we have to abide by the law of the land. But it seems to me that if the law of the land is favorable to them, then they can use that as an excuse. Like if it's, if the religion says no, you can't, but the law of the land says yes, you must, and if they personally want it and don't want to abide by the religious law, then that's when it comes in handy.
So it's kind of a cherry picking sort of situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because if any of the crazy gays start making laws, the religious people are going to be like, no, you have to abide by those laws.
Yes, only the ones that we like.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's, the only thing I know about something related to the question, and I don't know if there ever being an actual case, but I would say that it is really, though, probably now the more that I think about it, this is really what's going on with the religious rights. This whole everything we've been discussing is they want to have the law of the land reflect or, be in alignment with their religious views.
Yeah, that really does kind of come back full circle, like you said. Yeah, so, and I think on that note, we might wrap up here. I know we've probably got some more questions that people are interested in asking. Torah, are you going to be able to stick around for the hangout?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. Then we will definitely continue this here in just a second. But thank you so much for coming and bringing this up and bringing all of these things to our attention. I mean, as difficult as it is to think about, I mean, this is important information that, we want to educate ourselves, and you're definitely helping us to do that and stay informed. So thank you once again.
You're very welcome. And thank you for having me.
Yes,
both ways. I'm very grateful for this opportunity and glad you're interested in this and having these difficult conversations, some of it.
Yes. In fact, I'm glad you brought that up. I have a book sitting right here next to my computer called Difficult Conversations, which I highly recommend if you're going to be having difficult conversations over the holidays.
Yeah.
So, but no, thank you for facilitating and leading us in these conversations. I think they really are important, and you bring a great perspective and sort of sense of urgency to it. So thank you for that.
Yeah, we can't fix it if we don't know about it. So thank you, Torah. It was wonderful. And even though it wasn't, I feel like I got not the Christmas present I was looking for, it was the Christmas present I needed.
It was not the Christmas present we wanted, it was the Christmas present we needed.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, and speaking of which, we are actually going to be taking the next 2 Mondays off for the holidays. We will be back, Eric will be, out of the trunk by then, hopefully. Just kidding, he's fine. But we are going to be relaxing and having a short break. So we won't be here next week or the following week, but on January 10th, we'll be back again, same time, same channel. So be sure to keep an eye out on our social medias and the meetup groups and everything in the online community to see who's coming up next in January. And then actually, that's a great time now for Helen. Would you like to tell us about the social medias that people can follow us?
Yes, you can find us on the social medias. So all of our previous RfRx recordings, especially the one that Torah did just a month ago on the Yoder law and more information on that. I definitely recommend you look at our previous talk or any other talks that we have on our YouTube channel. Please go there. Also, if you have any questions, comments, hate mail, or tell us how great me and Kara are, you can send us an email at rfrx@recoveringfromreligion.org. You can find our blog again at medium.com, excommunications, and you can also, like I mentioned before, go look at our podcast and a bunch of different other topics regarding recovering from religion. Also, you can find us on the Facebook. So if you go to Facebook and go to Recovering from Religion, there's a lot of people that are in our online community, volunteers, leaders that are over there to interact and chat with. We are also, if you want to find our support groups, that is also on the Facebook. So you can go to our RfR support group page on the Facebook. We're also on the Twitter machine at RfR.org, and we are on Instagram at RfR.org, and we are on TikTok at TikTok.com at Recovering from Religion. So that is the best way you can interact with us, talk to other volunteers, talk to other people in the community, find out what's going on at RfR, and find out about all the wonderful work that we do and talk to some wonderful people. And I am out. Back to you, Kara.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you for explaining those. And we dropped all those links in the chat, so we didn't have to read them all off verbatim, but thank you for sharing that. I would like to bring on our most fabulous and amazing Executive Director, Gayle Jordan. Here she is. Thank you for joining us and giving us your comments. Take it away.
Thank you, Kara. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I love that you all have all fallen into the Eric Wells habit of idolizing the executive director. I can live with that. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Torah, I'm without words. This was, as the host said, so incredibly important and so incredibly painful. You know, we are in such a hot mess. I want to take a point of personal privilege and say, when I ran for state office in 2016 and 2018 in the state of Tennessee, there wasn't a snowflake's chance that I was going to win. Tennessee has a Republican supermajority, and I am a loudmouth, very liberal, very open, very atheist woman. But it was so important for me to be visible. It was so important for me to carry the banner. If you cannot run, and not everybody can run for 1,000 reasons, you can help a campaign. And I know I've been involved in the chat, and I am as disillusioned as everybody else with politics as they are. But it's the system that we have. So we can all take our ball and go home, or we can all remember last week when we spoke with Andrew Seidel, and we talked about the Dr. Seuss story about the last little voice that said Yop was the voice that allowed everyone to be heard. So Yop, if you can't run, you can attach yourself to a campaign. You can contribute to a campaign on the local level, on the state level, on the federal level, whatever your choice. That's the beauty of it, is you've got so many options. Do not discount running yourself for school board, road board, county commission, whatever you have. That's where it all starts. That's where the decisions are made. So I know that I am the executive director of a nonprofit, and so you'll forgive me for just a moment to say that it is so incredibly important for us to be politically active. And being politically active starts with being politically informed. And so, Torah, thank you for explaining that tonight in very accessible ways, for showing us, and we'll be following along with you when you come back the next time, and maybe you'll have an update for us that will keep us from rending our garments and tearing out our hair and running screaming from the room with our hair on fire. To our wonderful host, to Kara and Helen, thank you for just a spectacular job. To our troll stompers who are standing at the ready with those those removal fingers. Glenda and Rob, thank you for doing your hard work. Nikki, thank you for your commitment at Discord. If you can see on Nikki's screen, her video feed is down at the moment, but that 2:49 is the time it is for her in the AM in Europe. So we are grateful for her running the Discord part. To everyone who is a donor or volunteer for Recovering from Religion, thank you so much. And thank you for the rest of you for attending as we go to take these 2 weeks off and as we head into this holiday season. For some of you, it's a difficult time because we're exposed to family that we're still fractured with, that bring our trauma back. If you need us, we are here. Our volunteers are standing by in the chat line 24/7, and it'll be on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day and throughout the rest of the week. If you need to chat with someone, please find the green chat bubble on the Recovering from Religion site. Call 184. I doubt it. Someone will take your call. If you mean maybe you're even a volunteer and you've done the hard work and you already know how the system works, but you need a compassionate ear, someone to rant with, someone to express your frustration with. We're here for you if you need us. Thank you again for attending. Enjoy your couple of weeks off. I hope you'll stay for the hangout. Tora, thank you again for a wonderful presentation. Good night, everyone.